I hope it's okay. On behalf of Just as we warm up, if you're not here yet, could you put your hand up, please? Right, well, it looks like everybody's here. Oh. Blue sheets are coming out. Please sign so that we're not as crowded in the next room as we are this time. Right. Your slide.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. We're about to start. This is L3SM meeting, and this is Friday, so probably everybody has already tired. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for participating in this meeting. Very appreciate. And my name is Chu. Sitting beside me is Agent Farrell. We are co-chair of this meeting, and note to wear apply. This is Friday, so probably you have already read it for many times. So make sure you follow the IETF process, follow RPI rules when you make a contribution to this working group. And what you proposed and what you discussed in this meeting will deem as a contribution to the L3SM. Administrativia, and we need a minute taker and one JavaScriber, and thanks to for volunteer. We already have the minute taker, JavaScriber, and as a chair, I already joined the Java room. But if there's any volunteer who willing to take to be another JavaScriber, that would be great. And any volunteer for the Java?
Scott just made up.
I'm trying to get on the network so I can get.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I should close. Thank you. So I assume the mini echo auto stream has already been set up. Right now we have no remote participants. So for chapter room, we will watch this, and I hope we will forward the comments from the chapter room if anybody come up. And so blue sheet has already passed around. We have 2 blue sheets. Please make sure sign your name when it passes along, and we need to get it back when the meeting is concluded. Next. This is the agenda we proposed for today's discussion, and we have already completed Administrativia, and then we will, as a working group chair, we'll use 5 minutes to discuss the working group status and to see where we are. And after we finish this, we have two important parts. The first part is we have two parts. The first part is very important part. That is chapter work item. We will talk about the L3 VPN service model. We invite author to present and lead the discussion. We'll talk about what change we have already made, what issue we have already closed, and what is the remaining issue we still need to address, and what is proposal how to address the issue. And we'll focus on the open issue discussion. If time is not enough, we need to extend the time for this topic. And so second part is about other work. In this part, we first will discuss the liaison we received from the Metro IETF94-MIF, and we will invite Mahashi on behalf of MEF to give a quick update on what MEF is doing regarding YAM model for the MEF service. We will hope to have a good discussion on how MEF work is related to IETF work. And in addition, we have several proposals from the operators, and we list two proposals. One is service automation management architecture proposed by China Telecom Engine One. We hope we can discuss about this. And second proposal is about the VAS service model, and this is a new service model. But right now it's not in the scope of L3SM. So this meeting, just to remind you, and we are not focused on recharting. So, but we think right now so many service model proposed, and there's no right home place for this proposal. And L3M is the only working group to talk about the service model. So we think maybe we can take a chance to talk about that. Hope that also this new service model job can take this chance to trigger some discussion, get input from the community, and to see where we are, where we should go. Agenda batch, any question? You see no, so we. What is the working group status? Where we are? Actually, we have this is a second meeting in Yokohama. So since Prague, we made good progress on service model. We got a lot of discussion, and we talk about multicast support, end-to-end availability support, generic VAS, and VPN service identity. And the leading editor, actually, since the Prague meeting, they make a quick revision and try to close the issue we raised on the Prague meeting. And the key change actually is exercise the modularity approach, try to break down the service model into several building blocks that can be used by the future service model. So as a working chair, we set up the wiki page to track all the issues that has already been discussed. Some of has already been closed, some are still open. And we also plan to have an interim meeting before you come up, but unfortunately on October is very busy for also the service model chapter, so we didn't get the interim meeting set up, so the work get a little bit slowed down, but I think we still have a to-do list that we need to finish. So at this meeting, we will focus on this to-do list and some open issue, and hopefully we can make more progress on this chapter. And right now, we're waiting for the working group last call. We think maybe after this Yokohama meeting, and we will draft this discussion, trying to close all the issue, and hopefully we can get this work done at the end of this year or at the beginning of the next year. Next. So this is a current milestone. We only have a single work item And we will complete this work in January of next year. And when we get this done, we can complete this, close this working group. Any comments, questions? Okay. So first topic is about the L3 VPN service model. We'll invite Roboshak to have present. Thank you.
Hi, so yeah, this is a brief update and go through some of the issues that are in the current L3SM model. Stefan very kindly prepared the slides for us, so we have to thank him. So the context, of course, is a bunch of Yang models that we've got coming together, but also these Yang models need to combine to be able to actually configure some form of service. So the intention of the original draft that Kevin, Stefan, and Luis and myself pulled together was to try and have an initial pitch at a go for a service model around the layer 3 VPN service, particularly because the operators that we worked for and I worked for at the time were most interested in that service. That's kind of a pretty fundamental service for most large operators. So the intention was to try and see whether there was something common across the different service models, i.e. is there a chance to do anything that might be standardized here? And also to identify the things that would then need to map to in device config. So to look at saying, well, what underlying models do we need such that we can actually configure this service, and then look at the set that we've got in the IETF and see whether they're actually usable. I think one of the things that we'll have to debate is how far the standard model that we build goes, because a lot of the things that we're kind of discussing and my observation from the initial work we did was that we took more things out of the model than we put in, i.e. the set of things in the model was the standard things that was across all the operators that were involved, not necessarily trying to cover every particular eventuality. But to start with, I'll go through where we are with the draft. There have been some changes since the comments that I think were made in the session in Prague, which was that it needed to have some more groupings in it, such that it's more reusable and a bit more modular. So that's been done. Stefan's kindly moved most of the branches to groupings. We've then had a look at the VPN policy part of the model. Previously, we had a native VPN that kind of said which VPN a site was part of, and then policies that allowed you to have leaking between them. Now we only have this VPN policy, which is slightly more abstracted around how you take a site and how it's put into various other VPNs. So the idea was here that you could express things like a full mesh VPN or a hub and spoke VPN and give a site a role such that you can have multiple hubs or multiple spokes. The other thing we kind of debated quite a lot when we originally did the model was around whether we have templating within the model. So typically you might have a hub and spoke VPN where 90% of the sites are spokes and they all have exactly the same policy. So it's typical where you have like a retail provider that has lots and lots of edge sites and a couple of headquarter sites. So we just previously had this kind of type of site, and we didn't necessarily have a templating approach. Now we have a separate templating approach, so you can say, hey, here's a template for the site, and then apply that template to various other sites. I think this is generally something we should consider whether we want, because it depends really who we expect and how we expect to interact with the model. If it's programmatic, then there's less requirements to have templates. If it's more that a human operator might fill in a form, then you probably do want templates. Previously, I think we discussed that we had MPLS as a kind of access type that said that this was going to be a PE attachment circuit. Now it's been moved to being a leaf on the VPN basis, so it kind of says this is an MPLS VPN, and then we only have the signaling type on the access, which kind of describes what what the attachment looks like. Is there going to be some dynamic routing or not? I think we had BFD directly under the attachment. There was no kind of OAM separation in the model before. Now we have BFD under OAM. I'm sure that could be augmented by different operators who might use different functionality, but I think at the time we debated this to start with, the only thing that we commonly used was BFD, so that was why that was there. There have been some small changes, renaming of leavings, identities, etc., just to make them a bit more clear, and especially where they've been questioned. I don't think any of these were controversial. I didn't see any moaning about it on the list at all, so this is really just an editorial change. Stefan has also been working hard with on some of the other updates. We had a VPN identity and then a VPN name as separate things, and I think that consensus was that we had just a name for a VPN, and that was used as the identifier for it. It's probably a good change from my view, because it kind of removes some of the inability to support different operators' ways of identifying VPNs. We have DSCP matching in the flow definition. I actually don't know that I agree with this change. I think we need to think about whether in your service definition you really want to talk about something like DSCP, or whether you want to define some classes of service. Actually, it's kind of more typical in my view that that's how an operator service is sold, is that we sell bronze, silver, gold type approach, or another multitude of colors because you want to have 6 classes, and not DSCP. It's quite atypical in my view that we would let a customer or anybody specify what the DSCP value for a certain class on ingress was going to be, because then you end up with a multitude of ingress clause policies, and that's not ideal. We have this cloud access concept, which is essentially because I think most VPN providers that are doing private L3 VPN right now are doing some form of breakout, whether it be to the internet or whether it be to some other private infrastructure, typically third-party server hosting cloud stuff. So this has been added as a grouping. And then there was some good comments on multicast. This is interesting because, having worked for a few operators that sell L3 VPN, there's a sort of specialist subset of customers that tend to use multicast, but then the vast majority of VPNs don't get deployed with multicast in my experience. So kind of one of the things we might want to think about here is, yes, we could try and make this model exhaustive to describe multicast VPN and all the multicast options that we might have within the VPN service, but equally we could say, actually, this should be an extension to this service model, and you should augment it as an operator or as whatever, wherever you instantiate the model, to say, actually, these are the multicast options that I support. This would give you some flexibility as an operator to be able to say, actually, this is the subset of multicast I support, or model your particular services that might be based on the same kind of business service. If we are going to add it, as usual, I think every time we go through these things, we would need a multicast expert to come and to have a bit of a look at it and say what they think. And it'd be, I guess, from an operator that sells many multicast VPNs, it'd be great to hear from you as to some input as to how we might map that together. Because right now it is, as you can see, pretty basic there. We have a few issues open in the tracker. When the customer NAT address is used, so this is really when you are doing breakout to a third-party site and you need a third-party service or the internet, and you need to do some form of NAT. In some cases, the customer might provide addressing to do that, and it's not provided by the provider, so we need a way to be able to tell the provider that they should use that. As Stefan indicates here, I think we're ready to close this issue if nobody disagrees with that approach. We've already talked about the service identifier. There's an issue relating to end-to-end availability. So right now we only support primary backup and some load sharing. This is again another one where I think it's kind of key to understand what the common subset for this kind of business VPN service that we're describing is, and say whether we want to, or whether there's commonly people doing end-to-end backup. I certainly haven't, I don't know of somebody that is doing end-to-end at the moment, other than as a special thing, and that means that maybe you don't want to necessarily have it in the base model as a way to express it. We should figure out if there is sufficient flexibility in the model to be able to support it. with an augmentation, but not necessarily add it to the base model in my view. There's this grouping change that we've made. Already talked about multicast. There's a question around inventory. So to say, should we have operational state within the model that says which sites belong to a VPN or which sites are accessing cloud? I think this operational state question is actually more general than that, because what we have to kind of think about is, should we have operational state in all of the kind of protocol models? Should we take that one layer up and have an abstraction that says something to do with the overall operational state parameters that relate to the entire VPN? So you could potentially have that on a per site basis as well, that says, okay, this site is now down because both its accesses are down. Now the protocol side of it doesn't know that, because it says, well, each of those is an independent set of op state, but the service model might want to make those kind of abstractions, which are quite typical, right? So I think we should look at what the general op state approach should be for this model. Is it in this model? Does it need to be in a separate model? Is it common enough across operators that we need to represent that? Now, we didn't talk about this at all in the initial cut of this draft, so right now I would say that the kind of assumption is that there is zero op state in it, but that's only one approach that you can take. Actually, some of the service models that I'm currently building do have that kind of op state in them. And then we had a long discussion on the list about how we represent VAS on a service, and actually we got into, well, what is a VAS? I think this is an area where I would definitely recommend that we don't try and include this in the model, because there are so many different variants, there are so many different types of service that we could try and add in, that if we add some of them, then the concepts of some of them will be so alien to some operators, and especially where people use L3VPN as an infrastructure service. I think you can just about use this model as an infrastructure service right now, but if you start to add in VAS and things that are a lot more kind of customer focused and L4 to 7, then we're going to very much struggle to make this an adaptable model. I think we kind of agreed that we would have this cloud access, because it basically says a breakout to something that isn't this current VPN, and that's relatively common, I think. And I actually wouldn't really consider that a VAS. Any kind of additional things on top of it, we've kind of said let's not add them, and I think we should pursue that view. We have this issue around where site location should be stored. I think this is an interesting split between OSS and BSS architecture as to where you're going to store things. So I think you need a tie between the two, because your operational team will always need to know where the thing is if they need to report it to a third party or actually go there to go and fix something. But it doesn't necessarily need to be that system is the master of that data. So in my view, we could say, let's duplicate the data here. I think that's probably not the right thing, but we need to have something that's sufficiently flexible such that an operator can reference something where they store the details to do with the site, such that we can actually have some pointer back to physical geography and physical location. So I think that the question that we have here is what's in the model there enough for that? Is it sufficiently flexible such that you can do it, or is there anything else that we need to do? Whoa. So new slide that I haven't seen. Perfect. So I'll quickly read the slide and then I'll present it, and you can pretend that you didn't read the slide whilst I was reading it. So yeah, I actually did read the thread though, so that's good. We have some discussion as right now we kind of say, oh, there should be disjoint, there should be multiple accesses to a site, but we don't necessarily describe how they should be, they should relate to each other. And there's a proposal that we have a basic set of constraints, like, well, we have a set of constraints, and I think the list was not that basic. It was things like a latency constraint and bandwidth constraints, disjointness constraints. I think this is a noble ambition, but I would encourage anybody to try and actually come up with a sufficiently generic model for this that you can use it in more than one operator. Because the twice I've tried this in operators in which I've worked and had to model it entirely differently. So I think we don't necessarily need to say that this is something that you have in the base model. It's something that you can add as an operator, and it's pretty easy to add it, right? So you have a disjoint, you have a multiple set of accesses. You can have some base identities that say are they the same access? You know, are they two VLANs on the same physical Ethernet bearer, or are they different? And then an operator can add in whatever the constraints they might want there. Because to some extent, you're going to get into, well, what's disjoint? Is disjoint it's Ethernet over SDH on one side and it's plain Ethernet on the other side, or what? And that's a different story and different operators. So my view, let's not address this in the model. Let's leave this for operator extension when they use the model, if that's a requirement. We then have a set of things that we haven't yet worked on. Security parameters. We should have some security leaf in the model, but it doesn't really do enough. So it's really to say, you know, what do we need to be able to specify? Are there things for IPsec access and that kind of thing that we should be able to specify? And yeah, the focus of Kevin, Lewis, Stefan, and I, when we started writing the document, was because we all worked for operators that sell BGP, L3 VPN with MPLS encapsulation, was that PE-based model. We probably want to look and say, is this something that's more applicable as a model? And I actually think that it's a fair answer to say, no, this is for that service, and there isn't enough commonality. Or to say, actually, here are the bits that are common across an overlay L3 VPN as opposed to a PE one, pull those out into a base model and then extend that model with the L3 VPN PE-based model such that you have a common underlying backbone model that describes the L3 VPN generic service, and you can extend it into different types. But it's really, I think there's an important thing here that says, we need to think about how operators should use this model. Should they use it to say that this is, you know, this is something that you can always extend to do any L3 VPN service, or do we really expect that the way that they should use it is that they should is that it will be a drop-in service model for their L3 VPN service? Inter-AS, I don't think we should include this in the model. I agree with Stefan here. This is again a huge area of odd complexity that actually brings rise to a bunch of the complexity in service models for operators, because you have to interwork your service with somebody else's. So do all these mappings and how you're going to allocate things, what the kind of interconnect model is going to be. I think it's not key to have it in this model. It's something that you can extend into it, and you probably will need to do based on your own operator policy. We don't really have an option of hybrid VPNs, so at the moment I don't think we really have a good way to describe sort of break in from the public internet. So we can have a break out, but we don't really have a way that you can say, well, here's this site, and actually this site is special because what it does is it lands a bunch of IPsec connections that are from N other sites, which is a pretty common model, or from remote workers as well. So do we need to model that? Is that actually an extension? Again, that comes back to, if you do L3 VPN as a business service, that's a very common thing. If you do L3 VPN as a service that's an infrastructure service, then you're probably not going to use that. And then, is there anything else? And that probably comes back to the question that our esteemed chairs were asking: are we ready to last call this? It's really, is there anything that we feel is so fundamental that it should fit in this service model right now, or are we kind of happy with where we are? And I think that's me.
Quick comment, Eric Nordmark. So you said that you're not thinking about operational state. If you are, and that's an if, right? I assume that there would be something more in terms of the state of provisioning something. Just because I put some config in the Yang model doesn't mean it's actually provisioned, right?
Right.
So and the progression and provisioning might be something else you want to consider as operational state.
Right, and I think that then comes to a debate about where's this instantiated, right? So is it in something that does workflow, that does that provisioning? Yeah. And then is it this model that has to do that? Is there enough commonality between all workflow systems that we can actually store the common states?
Yes.
Here be dragons.
Understood.
So, Rob, thank you for stepping up and doing this. What I think we should try to do in the room, if we can, is just go back through these slides for each of the issues that are still marked as unresolved, and see whether there's anyone in the room who wants to take a position on each one, and see if we can get any progress.
So should we just go through the tracker issues?
Well, you might as well, yeah, just use the slides to drive it. And
so this issue is the customer NAT address. Anyone, any comments, concerns?
so the question here would be, if we close this as documented, will everybody be happy?
Robin Huawei. I think I'm not only to have an issue on this comments on this one. In fact, in the previous slides, you mentioned you add the OEM parameters in the service model. Yeah, because I have the concern is that one, because at the beginning, we want to define some of the abstract the service model to help user. But I think but until now, it seems that the NAT OEM are going to be added to the service model.
So I think we need to clarify what's there, right? So that the flag is not, here are the parameters that you shall use for this OEM protocol. It's, should this OEM protocol be used? So if you imagine when a customer orders a site, they have some liveliness detection requirement. Actually, that depends quite a lot on what the CPE they put on the other end of the connection is. So it's really a case of, are you going to run BFD, true, false, rather than I want to run BFD with this multiplier, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there is some abstraction. You're not going to get to in my opinion, not going to get to a stage where we say generically, is there some liveliness detection? Simply because customers need to be able to specify something to do with it. So the achievable level of abstraction is an interesting debate, and I think the way we've got it right now, it's a reasonable balance of that.
Okay, I think that this may be necessary. I agree this the use case you proposed, but my comments on this work, I think this is the first one, is that if the use case is necessary, I think, for example, the OEM, because if this is necessary, but I think maybe it can defend user-friendly language instead of directly use the professional technology. Yeah, I think this may be a challenge for the user, because also here the NAT, I think this still is the device-based language. This is a little challenge for user to understand what's NAT. Maybe he also understand what's the maybe IPv444 or IPv644, like this way.
So let's just consider who the user is, right? I think that's the fundamental thing to that question, right? So if you say that the user is, a guy sat in an enterprise trying to order something, then we kind of have to think, actually, there's a bunch of those different people, right? There's everyone from the IT manager of the 20-person company who doesn't know anything about it, but he wants all these bakeries to connect together, to the guy that sits in a multinational and will come in and tell you exactly how your quas is going to work for his service. So if you're going to try and build a model that has to work for both of those sets of people, what you really have to end up doing is saying, I'm going to build a model that does use the accurate thing, because I need a way to be able to specify that. And if I want to be able to sell to the other guy, actually take a further level of abstraction away and fill in most of the form for him. So if we, and that the same is true as if you say there's actually it's a BSS system that interacts with this thing to instantiate it on the network. At that point, the naming is a little irrelevant, but actually it's quite important, because the user needs to be able to sufficiently accurately tell what this thing is when it's going to go onto the network, because they actually do know what they're talking, not what they're talking about, but they know very specifically what they want to specify. So I think I agree with you. If I was going to give it to to an enterprise user of who's trying to order a VPN, probably going to still be lost. But I think that if you're going to do that, you probably want to abstract it up anyway through some presentation layer that's going to have some ability to fill in most of the things by default. And this model lets us still instantiate things usefully when we do want to be really granular.
Okay, so I think this my comment I finished, but I think I hope the service model is not to develop as the last is similar as the device-based model. This is the first my worry. And the second one, if we think that maybe the different user, they have a different requirement on the service model, maybe split this one, maybe do some of the augment work instead of define all things in the service model.
And that was kind of what I was getting to as to what should the model look like in the future. Should it just be the base set of parameters or not? In my view, actually, this model is very business VPN specific, but you could build a model that is generic L3 VPN things. And just on the should we use the device thing, we should think about whether a service model is actually just a model that describes configuration across n devices, because that's kind of what this one thinks about, right? And I do not think, I actually would really struggle to get to the stage where we have a sufficient level of abstraction for it to be user presentable whilst keeping it common across more than one service provider, because different service providers sell in a different way to different people, and they're going to those users are all going to have different views of what's simple and what's not.
Mahesh Chetanandani. Actually, I agree with you, Rob, that as it comes to abstraction of these service levels, at least the way we have done it in MEF, which I'll talk a little bit about next, is the level of abstraction that we are providing is really between what we call business applications and the orchestrator level, where you really don't talk about BFD intervals or you talk about NAT addresses. You're really talking about service level parameters and leaving kind of the rest of the intelligence in the levels below that. So.
And some of those things can be auto-filled out, right? It's the key thing is if a customer could specify it, there has to be a leaf in here, because otherwise because then it becomes a service parameter, right?
Max Nutcracker. The only comment from my side, if you just said that we trying to define some parameters between actually an orchestrator and between OSS and orchestrator, yes? Am I right? Am I correct?
So I guess this is going to come down to where do you draw these lines?
Because what I can see right now, we are talking actually about configuration, but not about the service.
So that comes down to the question that I said before, right? So is this model a service model because it describes configuration across multiple devices?
Because from my side of view, from the OSS side of view, yes. If we're talking about the service should be decoupled from the technology totally.
Right. So that's where things get interesting, because I would call that a product, because that's what's independent. Actually, when it comes down to it, in my view, most operators don't have a product that's sufficiently abstracted from the technology, and that's fine. But this is going to be one of the tensions of getting to a standardized model, right? If we want to have a sufficiently abstract model, we're going to kind of go away from this aim of what are the underlying models we need, because we're going to have this really generic thing that doesn't map to technologies and then doesn't tell us what the underlying models we need are. And I actually don't believe it'll be operationally useful, because I still don't know. I think that you're going to end up saying, oh, here's some fluffy things that haven't necessarily delivered anything useful for an operator.
My name is Michael Sharp. I guess this issue, as well as others, it really comes down to the definition of service model. And you can use this model in very different ways. And as my suggestion is at least document in the draft what the author's thinking is, what this model is about, who interfaces to what, because this is not clear. And a lot of the issues really come down to who is using this model for what. And as my suggestion would be, try to at least document this, and the current draft is very vague on this piece, and this causes a lot of confusion in my point. And I think you can try to describe at least one architecture where this fits in, and then a couple of these issues are very clear. It's very easy to sort them out, because then it's clear.
Mahesh Chetanandani. Actually, I will second that opinion from Michael. But on a slightly different comment, and I haven't read the draft, I just read the abstract to be able to speak a little intelligently right now. One of the issues that we struggled in MEF is to figure out when we define the service level model, and you say that in your draft that you are not talking about device level configuration. But what would be interesting as an observation is when L3 VPN service is defined, are you able to find all the device level configurations in the models that are there today? Or would there be a recommendation for you to say, we need to have a corresponding models developed in the devices also?
Sorry, I didn't quite get the last. So can you? Was the question? Do we have existing Yang models to be able to do the thing?
Yeah. So that's the question: is are the models sufficiently defined today for you to be able to realize an L3 VPN service on the device, or do you need extra capabilities on the device?
And that was one of the major motivations of doing this, right? Was to be able to say, actually, there are this subset that aren't there.
Yes, I agree. And what I want to say is that what I personally see here, yes, this is just a position like from my point of view. We put everything in one bucket right now. Like we mixing service configuration, we mixing equipment configuration. It's as a result, we have just one big ugly tree about configuration. And what we should do, we should provide some additional level of abstraction, which will be customer faced, yes. And as a part of the configuration should be related to technology. It should be connected to this model, and so our model in this case will be flexible and extendable and reusable. Because if we're talking about service from the service point of view, yes, I'm a customer. Yes, I just come and say I want let's say layer 2 VPN. And what is layer 2 VPN actually? It's 2 connection point. I need just a pipe. And how service provider do it for me? It's up to him. It could be layer 2 VPN. It could be one VLAN. It could be some optical line. That's
right. And that's, sorry if I repeat myself. I think the problem is some customers come and say, I just want an L2 VPN with these 2 endpoints. Some say, I want this L2 VPN. It must have this MTU. It must have this other thing, this other characteristic. It must have this set of .1p mappings. So what you need to have is a model that can take all of the possible inputs, but you can use a subset of them, right?
It is impossible to build, how to say, some model which include everything, yes, at once. But it's possible to build some, reusable models divided into some logical blocks, yes, And what also what I want to say, even if you talk about, let's say, layer 3 VPN, yes, what problem I can see right now, where actually our service starts and where our service ends. What I mean, because right now the demarcation line for our services, as I understand, it will be P or C device. Yes, right?
In the model, I don't think there's any assertion made about that, right?
So because you probably for different, I don't know, each operator, yes, it have some, own requirements on and own service model, own service provisioning model, yes.
So one thing I would say is when we first started this work, I was actually skeptical we sat down and the aim was, let's go and see whether we can actually build any kind of model. And we went away and each operator wrote down a list of, if I was going to build a model, this is probably what I would put in it. And we found a subset that was probably acceptable from things that we capture from our customer or captured from our customers that would build the service. As soon as we get into where's the service demarcation, we are not going to get to a standard so I worked at British Telecom until very recently, and we haven't had another company that did the access link. So the service demarcation really had this odd thing that the C is run by one bit of the business, the P is run by another bit of the business, a third P that actually does the service delivery is run by a third bit of the business. If you try and describe that, you already bake in regulatory things to do with an environment that you worked in, company structure. So the debate here, and actually this is one of the reasons I think we should be debating this, is there a model that actually works for more than one operator? Because if there isn't, let's not standardize this, right? Let's say, fantastic, we had a look at it, it didn't work, off we go. But the value of standardizing it is all the mappings that we do to underlying Yang models. If 90%, 80%, 60% of the stuff is the same, it means that anybody that's writing mappings can write it once and then extend their stuff.
But probably I believe it could be standardized because in my point of view, it's, how to say, probably easy to do because, you know, if you have other level of abstraction, yes, it's for OSS and BSS, it's obvious. You just need some service level of abstraction which customer faced, and you would divide your service, like decompose your service to components, service components, and that's it.
Rob Wilson, Cisco. So you made a quick comment about having two different types of services where they might be very complicated to set them up or simple service. And hence, I think you said the model here effectively covers the complicated case. There is the choice potentially to have a simplified model and augmentations and extensions to do more complicated ones as well.
Yeah, I think that's the best model. I think the best model is to have L3 VPN base that everybody can use, and then have something that does, this is a business VPN service. We should have a business VPN that, you know, template that sits on top of VPN base or L3 VPN base.
Yes, and that has the advantage then that it's very, very well defined as to what that extension is, and hence you narrow down the market it applies to.
Right, and it makes the base model more usable to more people. So in BT, then you use an L3 VPN for broadband backhaul, and you use an L3 VPN as a business service. Those things actually have 60% of the same config, but the other 40% is entirely different. And if you do this kind of model, then you end up with one big blob, and then you need to rewrite it to do the other service. So I think it's a good suggestion.
Okay, thanks.
Robin Huawei. I also have an interesting question for you, because I wonder how you group work on this model, because according to my understanding, because I'm involved the L2 VPN and the L3 VPN, eVPN, the southbound interface device-based model. But I think because we have many team members, I worked on it. But it seems for the service model, until now, is not only related with the VPN, and also with the net, with the OEM, with the queues, and also maybe I remember the next slide also with some the constraint maybe related with tunnel. I think this will need very experienced people to understand almost all features in the network. So I'm not sure how you work on.
So if you're working an operator and you have to own a service, you have to understand all the bits of your service. It's actually it's a bonus if you do, but there's always that bit that you don't really understand. But yeah, and that's, I think it comes down to you. In an operator, you're probably going to understand most of the things that are in the service, maybe not in the same detail you need to do the device level model, but you have to have a view of all the parameters that you're offering to your customers, because every time you design a service, you make a design choice as to every parameter that you configure into the network.
Yeah, but I think that you're in some of this the service model is a lot of related with the device implementation details.
It's entirely related with the device, because the only reason we're possibly capturing the things that are in this model is to configure them on devices to deliver a service. So if it doesn't relate to the device config or something to do with the way that device config fits into the service, then we shouldn't be capturing it in the model, I guess.
Rob Wilson, I wonder whether there's effectively two different models being discussed here. One that's the model that you're sort of discussing, which is one for the operators to provision services, and one that's being discussed here, which is almost one that's client-facing or customer-facing, that's a different level of complexity and detail. And you need two separate models for that, I think. Trying to get one to unified is too complicated.
Agreed.
Analysis keep early selection, just to follow up on what Zembin said earlier, how much of this model would apply to any generic tunnel or service instead of just L3 VPN?
A generic service?
Well, I think there are levels of...
Sorry, we saw a number of other drafts on other kind of models, other kind of tunnels, and I was wondering whether there's an overlap.
Tunnels? No overlap. So the comment, what was it that we mentioned? The comment we mentioned was around sites that are not connected via physical wires, basically. So the only reason, when you have a site that's not connected by a physical wire, it's probably connected by some form of virtual tunnel, right? But it's not, we're not going to describe all of the parameters that are required for it. It's the key things that are required. Like, so say it's GRE connected. We probably need to know the GRE, the IP of the endpoint, or if it's not something that's dynamically discovered, and any kind of key. Those are the only parameters that you really need to capture in the service model. The device config model has to have a lot more in it. And when you do the mapping between a service model and a device config model, what you really do is either programmatically or through translations or lookups, fill out what the device configs are going to be.
I think there's a bit of a sort of up level there, which is if you were making a service model for L2 VPN, or if you were making a service model for tunnels or whatever, would there be elements of this service model you might borrow or generalize or commonize? And that's a really interesting question to be had outside this room. All of which takes us back to, is there any way we can start to tick off some of these issues, but Max wants to have a go.
Well, probably I believe the model should be divided into parts. One part should be customer-faced, and the other part should be resource-faced. Because for the customer, customer don't care how I will provide service for him. He just needs some basic parameters from the service, yes. And the resource part, it can refer to exact technology.
So I see heads in the room shaking. One of them was mine, but I'm too lazy to get up and go to the mic. Depends on your customer. If you go and hire a car, sometimes you just want a car. Yeah, click, I'll have one. Sometimes you want a red one, or you want one with a certain amount of trunk space, or you fancy not having the VW diesel. Okay. If you take your view, then the abstract interface you present to the customer is probably as simple as how many wheels, does it have an engine, how many seats. If you want to worry about facilitating the advanced customer, you have to be extensible to some of these other parameters.
And a key thing around that, in my opinion, is actually what we're saying here is we're building a paradigm that says we map between models, right? We map between this layer of service model, which is resource-facing potentially, to device config. There is no reason you can't infinitely stack that mapping. And actually, in the systems that I'm currently working on, that's what we do. We've fragmented the configuration for devices into abstractions that are much smaller, and then we have services that use sets of those kind of breadcrumbs to build a service, and then we actually have a service that sits on top of it, which is much more meaningful to the user. So we just introduce an n-layer mapping to be able to say, take this is the level of detail that the consumer wanted to give us, and then we map it down into wherever it tends to go. And yeah, somebody has to write the way that says, well, when you ask for one of those, I'm going to automatically fill out these 300 options if it happens to be that complicated. But if you say, actually, we have to have one model, and it has to be for this customer facing, it has to be this abstract one, you end up with exactly the problem that Adrian described, which is everybody has to have the same thing. And in this area, one of the big problems is you have to remember that operators have hundreds and hundreds of salespeople that are going out and telling people that they should buy this unique snowflake of a model because that's our product and that's what differentiates us. So operators are not going to adopt something that where we overly abstract it and don't give them the freedom to be able to differentiate within it.
Okay, so let's talk then about process for moving the draft forward, which Rob happily smiles and says, and that's not me because I've changed employer. We've got a number of issues in the tracker, some of which, as Rob presented, we have proposed resolutions, and some of those resolutions need updates to the document, which is relatively simple. The two things we've got to look at are those issues that are not yet in the tracker that people have, and I think some of those popped up at the mic, and a couple of them are actually on the last slide in the presentation. So we need to get those captured as issues and then talk about them. And then for all of them, we have to try and reach resolution. Now we can try to drive this on the list, or we could pick a set that we want to talk about and have a meeting. And the meeting could be virtual or physical. I suspect, but we'll do a show of hands, that people would not be excited by traveling to a physical meeting to try to close these issues. But who would like to have a physical interim meeting to try to close the issues on this document? Okay, so that's a no hands at all. Who, if there was such a physical meeting, who would come to it but grind their teeth? Yeah. So that's not a lot. Go on then, Scott.
Scott Mansfield Erickson. I just wanted to, this is an ad for a face-to-face meeting that Etsy is hosting at Cable Labs in January on modeling of all things. And this type of model that you're talking about here is related to some of the models that ONF and MEF and Broadband Forum and TM Forum and Etsy and all these guys are doing. And this would be one of the types of models that fits into the whole stack of things that are trying to be done, starting from the concept of product catalogs and service catalogs, and then finding out the elements that you need in order to push down to this type of model, which would set up the endpoints, and then this would push other models that would then configure equipment. So even if you are even remotely interested in a face-to-face meeting to discuss this kind of thing, you might want to consider looking into that Etsy meeting. But so it's not until January.
As a co-locate, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So let's run on with my questions. Who would appreciate the idea of having a virtual interim meeting, in other words, a teleconference, to try to advance some of these issues? Okay, that's a good number of hands. And we'll open that a bit wider. If such a virtual interim meeting happened and it fitted in your schedule and time zones, who would attend? That's possibly a few more hands. Okay, so I think that's a fairly clear marching order to the chairs. And since the chairs are keen that we try to deliver on our agenda, we may be looking for a date, I guess, in early December. And we'll work with the authors about which issues they can drive to closure on the list. Obviously, don't wait for meeting. Talk on list. Do work. And we'll try to push through some of these and then come up with an agenda for an interim. Hello, Scott.
Hi, Scott Mansfield again. Just a suggestion, having dealt with trying to organize modeling discussions, I would have 2 virtual meetings, one set up for one set of time zones and another set for a different set, because we constantly bring in West Coast in China and East Coast in Europe, and it's tough to find one that works for everyone unless somebody's up in the middle of the night. So just a suggestion.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That will help with the scheduling ideas. Okay, so this is not engineering, but we are exactly on schedule. So this is Mahesh, please.
I'm almost glad that Rob went before me, so he answered most of the questions I was expecting to field. So MEF last week approved a Yang project to work on Yang models from MEF services, and as part of that, they decided to send a liaison statement to both IETF and IEEE to kind of let the other STOs know about the work that's going to happen, that is going to be happening in MEF. So let me talk a little bit about that. So I know there were a lot of questions with respect to what is the service model, what are the service models trying to target? Well, MEF has tried to do maybe a little better job of trying to describe exactly what they are trying to target. They have what is here an LSO reference architecture, and I'm going to talk a little bit about where exactly the Yang models that we are looking at are going to focus on. So let me see. So up, we have on the top the business applications. This is your typical OSS, BSS layer. We have what is called a legato interface that talks to the service orchestration. And that's the interface that the Yang models and MEF are going to focus on. There is another set of work that is also going on between the service orchestration and the infrastructure control and management. And the difference I see between the service orchestrator and the infrastructure is the actual breakdown of the service into network identifiers, pieces of the network that need the services to be realized. That work is currently not in scope of the work that MEF is, from a Yang model, is looking at, although there is some effort to use JSON schema to kind of define this. And of course, there's the element management system that ultimately configures the network devices at the bottom. So what are the services that MEF is looking at? MEF has a whole list of EVC-based services that they have defined in MEF 6.2. That's the initial phase 1 scope of the project. And then following that, there are OVC-based services that MEF has defined in MEF 51. So, and some examples of the services that we would be looking at as part of trying to model in the Yang. We're talking about an E-LAN, a point-to-point EVC-based service. E-LAN, a multi-point-to-multi-point service. E3, a rooted multi-point service. So these are some of the examples of what the Yang models are going to try to cover. So the question is, why am I here? Why am I presenting this? Of course, it's to make sure to let this standard body know of the work that MEF is looking at, but also possibly looking at some of the work that might be overlapping between what work gets done here and maybe gets done in MEF, and to see what areas we could be collaborating on. Right. That's pretty much it. Any questions?
Rob Shakir-Jive. I think a really interesting thing to hear from the MEF side of the house would be how people envisage mapping and the interrelation of models in the orchestration type layer to work, and what they think the requirements of the models, the service models are to do that. Because I think there are some nuances where you might want to particular annotations to be able to help your mapping work. And as more people work on that, I think it'd be cool to not have to everybody define their own. I think if you look at most service models today, they have a huge amount of annotation in them that tells the orchestrator what to do, and but they all really do the same functionality based on that.
Fair point. I think that's one area we could certainly focus on trying to collaborate on.
Hi, Scott Mansfield. Erickson. I can address, at least do some pointing to where to find some information about that. The MEF is working a lot with other groups like the ONF and the ITU on this, especially in the area of defining the guidelines on how to use UML and the tool sets to use UML and how you move from one to another. So it's all work that's in progress. There is a lot of effort being put into place there. The framework that we're trying to use is this lifecycle service orchestration model, which is more than just a model that describes the life cycle associated with all of service management, but it provides us a place where we can talk about product catalogs and service catalogs and how you interrelate products and services and resources, and the different levels of models that need to be created. So there's lots of different things that are going on in different places. So if you have any questions about that, you can contact Mahesh, you can contact me, you can contact a number of people in the MEF or the ITU or the ONF or whatever. Just look at the liaisons that we've received, that the IETF has received from the ITU on these types of things. And there are a couple of internet drafts that address that as well.
So I had a chat with Scott and Mahesh earlier in the week, and something that comes out of it is that we should remain in communication. And it's kind of convenient that the two of them are here regularly at IETF and are there regularly at MEF. And so we know that background communication is going to happen, and that both of you can shout at the chairs if you think something's going astray. With regard to this specific liaison, do you believe that this working group needs to take any action, this being a layer 3 service model working group? And does the ops area generally need to take any action, or is this information?
I would probably start by characterizing it as informational, and then maybe as a data point to say, well, if there are any services that this working group defines that needs to work with any of the models. I don't see anything quite obvious as yet, but if there are, that would be, here's a set of contact points for you to reach out to and get that collaboration.
Yeah, hi, Scott, again. I agree with what Mahesh said. I don't think there's anything in particular this group needs to do with this particular liaison. But just keep in mind that there is a lot of, it's mainly for information. So there's lots of information going around. There is a need to support the ability to do this type of orchestration and controlling. And there are other standards bodies that have been dragging their heels. They will remain unnamed. I'll give their abbreviation. No, I won't. And but there is a lot of effort that has happened in layer 2, and so creating the abstractions that we need to support both layer 2 and layer 3, and having that orchestration available is something that's on the front of everybody's mind right now. So just information.
Perfect, thanks both. Who has not signed a blue sheet? Wherever the blue sheets are, can you circulate them, please? So you may recall that we have precisely one deliverable on our charter. So discussing other documents, whether or not they have L3SM in the name means we're stepping outside our charter, and we're just making a bit of space at the end of this meeting for people to do advertisements. Come read my draft, this is what it's about, and come and play with me.
Good morning, everyone. And actually, these authors on the list on the page cannot be here, so I present these slides for them. If you have questions that I cannot answer, so please raise up your questions on the mailing list. This is some sorts of how to use service models defined in this group and maybe in the future, and how to use these service models combined with the network element models that we have developed in IETF. So the first slide is what is now in IETF, and there are on the left there are requirements from the service provider, and the right side is something efforts has already been done in IETF. We have network service models, and we have netconf to configure such kind of models. And we also have network element models developing many groups. So the question here now is how to deploy them in the real network, and what's the relationship with other management systems. So this slide is current model status in IETF. So according to the classification document in net mode, the models can be divided into two types. On the top is the service model, which abstracts some kind of customer requirements. And the next is on the bottom one is the network element models, which is some work in other groups. So the question here is, no draft discussed the service automation architecture that based on this network service model and network element models. Just during the first discussion, the relationship and how to use this kind of network element models, which is specific models and service models. This is a proposed architecture. So on the screen, the C1, okay. On the top, the C1 is where service model are be used, and the perhaps it's the C3 is the interface of C3 is connected to the device, which is some specific models. So in this architecture, they thought there should be some kind of C2 in this architecture. On the top, it's the customer service orchestrator, which is used to map the service models into some technology-independent models. And on the next level, which is the network service orchestrator, it's used to map some kind of technology-independent models onto the technology-specific models. So their question is how to define the C2 interface between the customer service orchestrator and the network service orchestrator. So the next slide is something they think what can be run on the C2, which is in the middle. So we already have C1 for the service models, and the C2 may be some technology independent models just to describe what I want from the network, but regardless of the specific technology used in different domains or different network segments. So on the bottom layer, it's the technology specific models, which will tell the infrastructure of the specific technology how to configure. So I think that's the thoughts. So the question is feedbacks on these ideas. Yeah, do you think it's useful work to have this kind of architecture and tell people how to use the service model and how to connect it with the network element models and how to connect with some technology independent and dependent models? So yeah, I think that's the last slide. So questions?
So my name is Michael Scharf. Since you asked for feedback from vendors, if you go to the CSO, no, on that slide number 4, the one that you've shown, slide number 4.
Okay, yeah.
So on the CSO functionality, I mean, you can argue a lot about what functions are where, but the one that really strikes me is on the CSO number 3, where you state that the CSO translates service parameters to network element configuration. So do you really assume that the CSO sees individual network elements?
Yeah, the translation in the CSO is translate the service model into some technology independent models, because you may have several domains in your network, and each domain has their different technologies. So you have to, you cannot understand what's going on.
I agree, but that's not what the slide says. The slide says that you translate into network elements. And this, I can just say as a vendor, this sounds to me a little bit strange that you see network elements that way up in the architecture. But that's just a comment.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So Adrian Farrell,
yep.
As a contributor, I think I agree with that point. I think we need to separate talking about network elements and networks. Yeah. I think having an architecture, a picture to point to, and some separation of the models into different layerings just in our heads is really, really useful. Very, very useful. I don't think it particularly belongs here. I think this working group needs to be looking at it, and we should talk with the AD about where we should position this work within the area, whether it's NetMod or whether it's in the Ops Area Working Group or something like that. I'm sure we can find a home for talking about it more widely than just this group.
Okay, thank you.
Max Netcracker, I believe it will be very useful for everybody to have such kind of framework.
Okay, thank you very much.
I thought I'd try this mic, Scott Mansfield Erickson. I agree with everything that Adrian just said, and think that we should also look at some of the liaisons that have come in from various organizations, because this is like I said before, this is a hot topic right now, and this is good work. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, if you have more questions or comments on this, you can put it into the mailing list, and the authors can see the questions. Okay, thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Gurong from China Mobile, and I think my presentation has some relationship with the previous presentation, because my topic is about the young data model for value-added service, and VAS for short. And here we present the VAS service model. Before describing the VAS service model, I think it can be divided into 5 questions. And the first 2 questions is about the service model. Why do we want a service model, and how to use a service model? And I think we can find the answer from the previous presentation, because the service model is the abstract way to express the user's requirements. And how to use the service model, and the service model by mapping the service model and the specific data model, service can be easily provided. Here, the service model is maybe see in a figure with the red star. It connects the application and the orchestration. And about the last 3 questions is about the VAS service model. What's VAS for, and what's the VAS service model for, and how to use the VAS model. About VAS service, I think all of you know what's VAS. And what's the VAS service model? It's one of the service model focused on the VAS service. And it also provides a common structure to make the configuration and the operation of the VAS service. And how to use it also by mapping the VAS service model to the VAS to the data model. The VAS service can be easily provided. And here also the VAS service model is connecting the application and the orchestration. And in realizing the VAS service model, we use the YARN module. The YARN module defines the VAS service components. Here is the VAS service components. It has 5 parts. The first part is about the administration information, such as the tenant ID and the VAS service name, VAS service ID. And the second part is about the type of the VAS component. As is presented, there are many kinds of VAS service. So here we use the type of the VAS component to identify each VAS. And the third part is about the policy configuration. Here something should be noted is that we don't make the detailed policy configuration here, but we just use the policy ID, which can be referred to some policy modules, such as in a super work group or many other policy module work group. And the first part is about the VAS availability configuration to identify whether the service is of high availability or not. The 5 parts part is about the management information. And then we also built the YARN model defining and providing 2 RPC commands for the management and the policy management by sending the request and receiving the response to make the confirmation of the service and the management. After the main content of my draft, here I want to share you a trial of the service model in our cloud data center. And here we decided to plan 5 kinds of services from service A to service E in our data center. The service A is the firewall or load balance only. And from the service B and to the service E, there are some service function chain. Here we have realized that the service function A used the service model. In the bottom picture, we can see that the load balance is adopted here. And so then come to my question. As I know, the VAS service model is out of the charter of this work group. So I want to ask everyone: is the VAS service model a direction to go? If the VAS model is if the VAS service model is the direction to go, then would you like to participate and contribute to this work? Because we think it is valuable. And then come to my third question is: how can VAS service model work with the recent VPN service models? And then before my next step, I want to share you a picture. This is a picture I found out in this is the story about the banana. The banana wants you to be happy. Look, it's even smiling at you. This is the last day of the IETF 94. So don't be sad, just be happy. I wish you to be happy with your smile like this banana. Then let's come back to my draft, comments and suggestions. Any questions?
Robin Huawei, okay, you need not to change. I'm happy. Okay, I think that this work is useful. Yeah, but I think that is because now the VAS, because in the data center, maybe they have the different VPN technology will be taken. Yeah, not only the L3 VPN and also the EVPN and also maybe VXLAN like this way. Yeah, so I think this may be also related with many VPN technologies, but I think this is a good start to have a discussion here.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yes, I think it's a really good point, and what I probably think our service will also will be useful for the discussion, and but especially in context of in technology independent context.
Okay.
All right, I'd like to do a little show of hands here in our remaining 4 minutes. Who thinks that this VAS work is so exciting they want to start work on it now and discuss it with the authors? Who thinks that this VAS work is really important and they'd like to encourage the authors to continue with it and will be watching it?
Thank you.
Lovely, okay. I think you should, when we get back from this meeting, you should kick the chairs to help introduce you to the area director to see where we should put this work. But you should go on driving it and let people know how you progress.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Just have the smile.
Yeah, all the Australians are looking at this banana and thinking, why is it unhappy? We have a couple more minutes. Is there any other business anybody wants to raise for L3SM? Going once, going twice. Okay, off you go. Go and eat your bananas. Thank you.
Where's bullshit? Yeah, please let us know.
And I suppose